residential development that's really aiming to try to conserve water and taking a very drastically different approach to reimagining what our landscapes look in our home landscapes. So with that, I'm going to keep moving. I'll go here and discuss my outline. I'm going to talk a little bit about what motivates my work, why I'm doing what I'm doing, discuss briefly the environmental impacts of urban landscapes, which apparently everyone on the call really figured out. And I will discuss this project that focuses on drought-tolerant native plants as a solution. Just one solution. There's probably many solutions to address sustainability, not just native plants. And then also I'm going to discuss beyond that, what we're learning from the project, the real world impacts of the project, what has changed in land development due to this collaboration that we've been doing. And then lastly, I'll go through some brief conclusions. All right, so I'm going to start the talk off on a little bit of a downside, but it goes on an upside, I promise. Currently, researchers who study biodiversity, that's life on Earth and all of its shapes and forms, are showing evidence that we are living in the sixth mass extinction event. That is where life is going extinct at a very rapid rate, as rapid as what we would expect from other extinction events. There's been 5 others, and the one we're all familiar with is probably the dinosaurs, because dinosaurs are awesome, right? I mean, everyone has learned about dinosaurs in some capacity. But this 6th one that we're experiencing right now is largely, if mostly, due to human activities, right? And it's been occurring with increased human population growth. And what this figure shows here, if I can show my pointer, sorry, let me get the pointer here. Okay, is don't worry about the colors and what things are extinct. This is the IUCN Red List. It's a global list of species that are threatened or endangered to extinction. And what I just want you to see is it keeps increasing, right? This is not going away. It keeps increasing. And why does this matter? Well, it's not just about biodiversity and loving nature. Humans get a lot of benefits from this biodiversity. For example, we get pharmaceuticals. As largely, a lot of our pharmaceuticals are derived from natural compounds in nature. Something else that I also think about is the canary in a coal mine scenario. If Earth is losing this much biodiversity, it suggests it's increasingly less hospitable to life. So I worry about that for humans. And that's why, because we get ecosystem services from biodiversity, benefits from nature, and there's 4 different types here: provisioning, food, water, regulating, flood and disease control, for example, climate regulation, supporting services. This is like nutrient cycling in the soil, habitats. Basically, it's things and services that help to maintain life on our planet. And then we also get a lot of cultural services from them. Nature is a major source of recreation for people. There's religious value to some, aesthetics, even economics, right? So that's why biodiversity matters. And just to point out that this is all not about just, hugging trees and loving nature. There's an actual real economic concern. Figure here shows within 2 years what the global economic or the World Economic Forum considers to be risk to our economic global stability. And if you look at 2 years here, you see this sort of misinformation, disinformation, social polarization, and cybersecurity. I'm sorry, I just saw something come up. I just clicked on it. It said something about speaking English. But in the 10 years, look at what happens here. This is the World Economic Forum. That it becomes nature-based solution problems, really. Extreme weather events, something that Florida is very familiar with. Critical changes in Earth's ecosystems, biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse, and natural resource shortages. So I think it's something that we all need to be aware of in the short term and long term, these sort of biodiversity loss. So, sorry, I'm having trouble advancing my slides for some reason. Okay, sorry. Okay, so one of the reasons for the loss of biodiversity that we're seeing is urbanization. It's land cover change, land use change, humans altering the natural land covers. And we've been doing these for a long time for agriculture, but the fastest growing land cover type that we have right now is urbanization. And what this picture shows here is a piecemeals together nighttime imagery, satellite imagery of global urbanization. So where you can see the lights. Look at Florida here. We are a very urban state, right? And in fact, in our lifetimes, the human race has undergone a really important change. It's actually switched from a mostly rural species to a mostly urban species. And that's only predicted to increase and by 2/3 by the year 2050. So what we expect to see is increased and more urban areas, expanding, continuing expansion and loss of habitat. And as I pointed out in that question, in North America, China, Europe, and actually India, we these urban areas are actually becoming less dense. So think less about Chicago, Miami, and think more about the villages, right? Here's the villages in Florida, one of the fastest growing urban environments in the United States. And over here is another urban environment, and I don't even know where that is, but I know it's not from Florida, judging from the trees. But look at the striking similarity in the vegetation communities. We've removed natural or semi-natural vegetation, and we're installing mostly lawns with a few ornamental plants. This is called urban homogenization, and it's because urban environments are increasingly similar to one another, more similar to each other, even across large areas than they are to nearby ecosystems. So something that's urban homogenization. So that's one of the environmental impacts. And why are we talking about this in Florida? Well, we're the poster child of low density urbanization. If we look at these red areas, this is what the urban areas were in 2010. And if we were to continue, this is a model projection. There's a lot of assumptions to this model. But if we were to continue as business as usual and continue to develop the way we're developing at the density we're developing, this is what the state is projected to look like in the year 2070. And this is also due because we have 900 and plus people moving to Florida daily. So this is an issue for obviously for habitat loss and lots of other environmental issues, not to mention lifestyle, right? Traffic jams. This is not an attractive future for Florida. If we look at water, just off the top here, it's predicted to over double due to this population change by 2070. Currently, the demand for water in Florida is at 3.1 billion gallons per day and is predicted to double to 6.5 billion gallons per day. So that's something, we don't have as much water as people might think, especially outside of Florida. I think people are shocked to hear that Florida actually is experiencing or starting to experiencing concerns about their water and water availability. Okay. So obviously there's habitat loss when we convert land, and there's land use change going from, a natural or semi-natural system to this urban environment. But we have other impacts as well. We introduced many of the invasive plants that are causing harm to our natural environments were introduced as horticultural species, and two of these are here. We have algal blooms, and I'm not saying that all urban environments are the only thing contributing to Florida's algal blooms, because they're certainly not. But mismanagement or overuse of fertilizers or incorrect uses of fertilizers are certainly can be associated with water quality. And similarly, we're using a lot of water. These are landscapes that we estimated are using between 900 to 1,100 gallons per irrigation event for water. So it's a lot of water being used. And again, this is also due to mismanagement of irrigation oftentimes as well. Not all irrigation is bad. We have to irrigate to get plants established, but we can also certainly work to educate homeowners on how to not waste a lot of water by this overspray, for example, right? Okay. So I'm going to shift gears and talk about, when we think about biodiversity loss and conservation, we often think about, the lions, the tigers, the bears, the charismatic species. We don't often think about the little things that run the world, is what E.O. Wilson, he was a famed ecologist. He said we should actually be starting to think about insects and arthropods. That's because they provide us a lot of services. If you think about it, 30% of our food comes from pollinators. We have decomposition in the soil that would not happen as fastly for nutrient cycling if we didn't have arthropods and insects. They provide food for all the wildlife we like the birds that everyone likes in their yards. And when we look at insect populations, this study here found that 41% of the insect populations being studied globally are actually in decline, which is kind of alarming. So what's causing the insect decline? And it's not really one source of problem. It's actually these authors call it the death by 1,000 cuts. And I point out a few of them because they're things that all of us contribute to an urban environment. And I mean that by myself as well. I live in an urban environment, I landscape. So, I am contributing to these just as much as anyone else is. We remove forests. That's one of the problems. We're using insecticides in agricultural areas and urban environments. We have introduced species that compete with and harm insects. We obviously have pollution, from vehicles, different things. As I point out, urbanization in general, nitrification through adding fossil fuels, combustion, and nitrogen deposition, and also overuse of fertilizers. And eventually, even, we also have global warming and construction, and actually heating of large buildings and homes actually does contribute to global warming quite a bit. So there's a lot of things. Okay, now the benefits though. The question I'm getting to, let's switch to the positive note. This inspires me, actually. These sort of problems inspire me to think about how do we build more biodiverse, less resource intensive urban landscapes. And then I add on this last part that provide not only environmental, but economic and social benefits, because we're living in urban environments. These are urban environments that are designed for anthropogenic source of functions that we need them. And how do we create them so that they have these economic and social benefits as well? And there's not one size fits all. These are different landscapes that I've taken picture of. Some of them range from a very conventional one down in the bottom left. This homeowner was using no fertilizer, no insecticides, no pesticides for plants, basically mowing their yard and watering on occasion. I think that's a pretty sustainable landscape. You have a green roof here, which is a native plant dominated one. Here's a non-native plant dominated one that looks nice. Here's another yard that's trying to recreate habitat. So there's a lot of variation in what we can do to attain this goal, which is also exciting. Okay, so that's what my group does. We're trying to explore, urban and residential landscapes. And I think we're missing a big opportunity to educate people about ecology and conservation right outside of our front doors. And here are things that I've seen in my yard. I took this picture. This is an eastern box turtle living in my yard. This is a glass lizard living in my yard that a cat got. These are all snakes, both type of snakes. I've seen them in my yard. So I live right in the middle of Gainesville. I'm not living out in the country. I'm living in town. So my lab group is trying to increase this ecological understanding of our urban and residential landscapes. And we're trying to figure out how we can design, construct, and manage them to support biodiversity and provide ecological benefits while we're balancing what we want from our yards. So this idea stems from this concept called reconciliation ecology. And this is a paper and a book written by Michael Rosenzweig. He's a kind of renowned community ecologist. And he showed that the urban areas, or I'm sorry, the terrestrial environments on our globe, 75% have been altered by humans. And there's actually, he showed mathematically, there's probably not enough natural land left to support all the biodiversity on our planet. And even if we stopped land use change, we're going to experience more extinction. Even if humans stop doing every impact of the planet, we're still going to experience extinction. And he refers to it as an extinction deficit. And he argues that restoration ecology, restoring natural environments and protecting natural environments is not going to be enough to conserve this biodiversity. He argues what we need to do is think about how we balance human enterprise in human-dominated landscapes with supporting biodiversity. And he defines this reconciliation ecology as the science of inventing, establishing, and maintaining new habitats, conserve species in the places where people live, work, and play. And he gives this really exciting example. This is the peregrine falcon. This is the picture of the Chicago skyline. And the peregrine falcon almost went extinct due to the uses of DDTs causing problems with their softening their shells, and their numbers are rebounding. And something's really intriguing about this rebound. They used to nest on cliff habitats, and now instead they're starting to use skyscrapers and cities as habitat for nesting. So human construction, serendipitously, is actually benefiting nature. So he's saying if this can happen, we can figure out how to build, construct, and work and survive as humans while supporting biodiversity. He uses that as just one of many examples in that book. Um, and what's really intriguing about this is when I look at urban environments, there's a lot of opportunities to do something. We have, of course, abandoned lots, but we also have our yards. We also have like campuses and medical campuses and college campuses, school campuses. We have public gardens, which are becoming increasingly popular. We have parks, green roofs. Some people are interested in that. We have natural areas. So we have lots of space actually in many urban environments where we could start to rethink how to design, construct, and manage them to support some biodiversity. And that's where my work looks at. And we unapologetically look at artificial ecosystems, designed ecosystems. We look at ornamental gardens. They provide a function, and a very important function, of enhancing the aesthetics of our urban environments. We look at stormwater ponds where they provide a critical function of flood control and also trying to prevent nutrients and pollution that run off our landscapes from getting into our natural water bodies. We look at we look at our yards where people use for their recreation and leisure, and where I'll study a lot, talk about next, is really new residential development is where a lot of our work is currently going on in my lab group. Okay, so within the context of new development, there's some writing on the wall that industry leaders are seeing. Newer developments are being restricted by the amount of water they can use, more so than older developments. And they're looking for new approaches. They're looking for new approaches. And I think provides an opportunity for emerging markets and economics and entrepreneurial activities. And just to give you an example, here's a demonstration garden of a native landscape at Cherry Lake, which is a big nursery in Central Florida. And this is Brian Kanan, an urban planner who is working on the development, looking at this, trying to figure out how he can utilize this in his development to help serve and conserve water. Similarly, here's another land developer that we were working with, taking a tour of a native dominated landscape in the villages that meets HOA requirements, and which are very strict down there, to look at them, to reimagine how he can address water restrictions in his development. And that's the development we're going to focus on. So here's a project that's happening right here in the Sunbridge Stewardship District of Florida. And I want to add something. What I'm going to show you today is kind of very unorthodox for landscaping, pretty unconventional, and is definitely might not work in everyone's from. And so I'm interested in your thoughts on what you glean and what you get from this and how you might adapt it to where you are, and to hear what we're doing here and what would work or might not work where you live, work, and play. So this is the Sunbridge Stewardship District. This is the first phase of the development. This is a portion of a Deseret Ranch. It's about 33,000 acres. This is not the full build out. And in 30 years, we're expecting 37,000 new homes in this development. And the developer came to the University of Florida with a major problem. Toho Water Authority is not granting them enough permits to put in conventional landscaping. So they have to find alternative approaches to conserve water. And they also want to make sure whatever they do in their landscapes, they protect the water quality in these nearby lakes, because they see them as important features in the landscape, amenities, and they also want to protect their ecological integrity for future generations. So they want to know that whatever is being done in this landscape is not going to affect them. We have a lot of partners in this project, and this is where I think we really make progress in solving complex problems. It can't just be academics living in a bubble. It can't just be people doing business as usual. It needs to be people who sometimes disagree coming to the table and say, what do we do about a complex problem of conserving water? in a new development. What we have here is various partners in the University of Florida. We have collaborators from the University of Central Florida. We also have county extension agents. We have the Water Authority who's been helping us with this project. We have Tavistock, the development company. We have the municipal leaders, Sunbridge. Cherry Lake is the largest plant producer, and one of the largest plant producers in the southeastern US. Life Soils, which is a private company looking at strategies to remediate damaged, degraded urban soils. And then the Nature Conservancy, because they also have an invested interest in trying to protect natural areas and conserve water. All the things we're talking about here is important to them. So they want to make sure, hey, if development's going to happen, how do we do it better? And I have to shout out to people who funded my research, the Program for Resource Efficient Communities, the Center for Land Use Efficiency, the Tavistock Development Company has given us funding, and also the Nature Conservancy. And I also want to acknowledge Cherry Lake and Life Soils. These two partners have put up a lot of plant material, provided some of the organic compost I'll be discussing, and have also helped us collect data. The project I'm going to show you would not be possible without their help. Okay. So what do we suggest? Well, to the developer in the early meetings, they're trying to find ways to conserve water. And we said, well, you know, there's a lot of drought tolerant plants in Florida. You can go around in droughty times and go into the woods, go into the wetlands or prairies or natural areas, and you see a lot of native plants. And that can help you conserve water maybe, and maybe using more of them in the landscape. And after you establish them, and then you also don't need to generally apply fertilizers. And they also, research shows that they tend to be more pest resistant than non-native plants. And I'm not trying to bash non-native plants. My yard is a healthy mix of native and non-native plants. I know they're important for food. We have a lot of aesthetic value in a lot of non-native plants. But this was just one tool we were trying to present to them. And we also know that there's a lot of native plants already in the industry, such as some of that are listed here. Now, of course, the developer kind of looked at us like we had a third eye because they weren't even sure what we were talking about. So this is what this picture shows is an entryway into the development. Here's another development across the street, which I'll talk about later. But this is called Base Camp. It was the entryway into the development, and they incorporated in this development some natural areas where there's conserving land and they have walkways. But in this entryway, they gave us this very large space where they said, why don't you put in a garden to show us what you mean by native landscaping? What would that look like? And we convinced them that, well, first we said, thank you. That's awesome. That's a great opportunity. But I think we could do better. Instead of just having a garden that, shows people what it looks like, why don't we actually design an experiment where we can quantify the potential benefits of this in a way where you know whether or not it's worth your time going down this path. And what we did was we designed this experiment to use it as an opportunity to explore strategies to establish native plants in very degraded urban soils. A lot of people recommend native plants, but the reality is native soil or urban and development soils are very different than the native soils that these native plants have evolved to live in. So we have to really test whether or not which ones will or will not survive. And the reason is the development process itself. We usually this is it. They'll go in and they'll scorch the earth. They'll scrape the vegetation off of the land. They'll dig holes for stormwater ponds, so to grade the area for stormwater runoff, and they use all this fill and other fill that they ship in to raise house foundations above water levels. And they use a lot of very heavy equipment to drag that soil around. In the end, what you have is very sterile, very compact soil that no plant in its right mind would really want to live in, right? Minus some of the weediest species. And what do? We go in, the builder goes in, after they would have this compact land, they build a home, and they put in some of they need to stabilize soil, so they put in something that's very cost effective, sod. And they'll put it in with a few ornamental shrubs, and then they leave the homeowner to deal with keeping this stuff alive. and they often keep it alive through irrigation and fertilizer, and oftentimes overuse of irrigation and fertilizer when there's a big issue with just the soil in general for these conditions. Then again, urban soil issues. A natural soil has a lot more air and aeration area, spaces for roots to grow. Compacted soils, it limits it, it hinders plant growth. You got poor drainage and aeration. You have reduced root penetration. And also you have a higher pH and just generally lower biological activity in the soil, which is not healthy for our landscapes. So what we decided, here's another shot of this experiment. Notice the walking trail we have through it, because again, it wanted to demonstrate, it wanted to double as a demonstration site. And here I am, if you can see me in this picture, and my PhD student, Brooke Moffis. And we set up a design to look at irrigation and compost strategies for establishing these plants. And what we used was we tested an as-needed irrigation strategy. That is, once the plant's established, let's shut off the irrigation and see how the plant does, or only irrigate it if we think that plant's going to die. Because this is mimicking an urban landscape. We don't want our plants to die in our landscapes, right? We have to irrigate them once in a while. The second one is a regular irrigation. This was once a week, whether needed or not. We're going to turn on the sprinkler heads and irrigate, just like we would see in urban environments oftentimes. Then half the soils we amended with compost to try to up that biological activity. And we also know that compost can enhance water holding capacity in the soil. And then the other half had no compost. Okay. As I mentioned, this doubles as a landscaping feature. This is Mark Russell. He used to work at Cherry Lake. He helped us design this experiment so that it didn't just look like an ugly experiment. And what we did was something really interesting. We planted the plants, every plant we planted, all 26 species, in the exact same location in each plots. But what we did was we kind of did a mirror image in the design. So when you walk through, it was kind of flipped. So you'd have these plants here, and then the next spot, it would be flipped over. So it broke up the monotony of making it look like the plants were planted in the same spot. So thanks for Mark with his creative, he's a landscape designer, helping us make an experiment look like a garden instead. Okay, and here's just our setup. We set this up in January 22nd. It's Mark Singleton putting in compost. He put in a lot, 4 cubic yards per 1,000 square feet. And Cherry Lake insisted on having drip irrigation because that's what they want to use in urban landscapes to try to help out with water conservation, as opposed to more perhaps conventional just irrigation heads. And I'm not going to go through this verbatim, but I'm happy to share this talk afterwards. They put in 26 different species. A lot of them were tried and true. About, a third of them were, but others were not so much tried and true. And they wanted to test them out. For example, cardinal flower and some other species. They wanted to just test out how they would do in these soils. Why? Because it provides a commercial opportunity. So we're studying not just how to establish these plants, but we're also looking for plants that we can say to growers, this one will do well in an urban environment. It might be worth your benefit, worth your time to start trying to produce this and sell this flower or plant. So what do we look at? We looked at, there's 4 graduate students in total working on this project. We're looking at plant survivorship and growth, pollinator and ground dwelling beetle diversity. We're looking at various aspects of soil health. We're calculating irrigation and maintenance costs, and then we're also looking at pest and herbivory. I'm really going to focus today on the plant growth, a little bit about some of the pollinators, and then the irrigation aspects. So what we did was, Brooke Moffis did this, my PhD student. We came up with a metric, or Brooke did, that we could communicate to growers and the industry and our private partners. And this is a horticultural metric that looks at the plant growth, rates it from a 1 to a 10, where 1 is dead, 10 is an excellent quality, it's the best looking plant you'll ever see, and 5 is usually a cutoff where it's a fair quality, it's marketable, you could still sell it. And we used, again, instead of like just looking at volume of the plant or something, we wanted the results to be translatable to our private industry partners. And here's what we found. We looked at visual quality over a 2-year period, and these are in plots in blue and compost and without compost. And what we saw was, over time, the plots with compost had higher visual quality than the plots without compost. And I point out here, this is March 2023. I don't know about very southern Florida, but up in central Florida, we went through an entire winter without a single drop of rain, and then we went through a really hot spring. And notice that even the good-looking plants, the best-looking ones, are still, here's 5. This is at marketable level. Even the ones in the, after that first rough growing season, were still hindering or, teetering on, that marketability. But the ones in the no compost plots would not have been marketable. So important. Now, what do we find regarding irrigation? Well, here's in the very first part of the study, up until June 2022, we irrigated all the plots in the same, right? All the plants have to be established and they got the same level of irrigation. It was after June where we installed our as needed irrigation. And again, here's the drought, right? Here's this drought, and then this is spring. And this is a very hot, dry spring. And what you can see here is there was slight difference that we detected here between as needed irrigation, where there was lower quality for the as needed than where we irrigated weekly, but it's not a whole lot of difference. And this is important because when we looked at, but the rest of the year, there was really no difference in our irrigation treatment. So no difference in visual quality of these plants regarding whether you irrigated them weekly or as needed, except for the very spring where it was really after a really dry winter. And why is that important? It's important because of this. When we looked at how much we used in these 2 treatments, we used 15,480 gallons for the as needed between June 24th and October 5th. We used close to 74,000 gallons. So irrigating as needed saved almost 80% of water. So you have to ask yourself, is this much improvement in visual quality when they're both doing bore worth spending 80% more water? That's a question I can't answer, but it's a question that should be answered. Okay, so, and I'm going to just show you some pictures because I think a pictures tell 1,000 words. Here is an as-needed irrigation without compost in July 2023, our second growing season. And again, we, dry winter, dry spring, not a great growing environment, just it was a tough time getting plants established. This plot really signifies the worst case scenario. You're giving it the least amount of water and you're letting the plants kind of survive in like the worst soil conditions. Here's the opposite. Weekly irrigation with compost. More water, better soil conditions. Not surprising, the plants are looking a heck of a lot better. You can also see where these planting designs are the same in these plots. So look, not surprising. But here's what's interesting. Here's a plot where we gave weekly irrigation without compost. And this is in July 23rd again. Same planting design, as needed irrigation. So it got 80% less water, but it had compost. Look at the improvement in the plant quality. It tells us something really critical. Soil conditions matter in new development soils. One other thing we found here, which was really kind of somewhat unexpected, but not really that surprising when you think about it. We had, this is research done by the University of Central Florida on pollinators. And they looked at plots with compost and no compost. And they found across the entire project twice the amount of pollinators in plots with compost. And that was because you had greater floral resources in those plots. So again, not really surprising, but it's pretty cool from a practical standpoint. Having better soil conditions produced healthier plants, which had a trophic effect on pollinators. And I'll just show you, we'd also studied, and this is a big slide, and I'm not going to go through it all, but basically it shows average pollinator species richness, the number of pollinators we found based on the different species. And some of the winners, this is Monarda punctata, had a lot of different pollinators. In yellow here, we have, rattlesnake master, that's this plant right here. But the main story you see is there's lots of different colors between the different times of year. And it means that what we learned was that if you want to sustain pollinators, having a diversity of plants that flower at different times of year is critical in addition to these super plants. So for example, this one here, Medarda punctata, does a great job of attracting pollinators in the fall, but not so much in the summer, right? So just something to think about. And again, I'm happy to share this, and I apologize, I should have had the common names for all these plants up there. But the moral of the story is try to pick species that vary at different times of year and use a diversity of flowering species if you want to sustain pollinators throughout the year. Okay. So what did we learn? We learned that we can maintain plant aesthetics with 79% less water. And we also learned that, healthy soils matter in maintaining healthy plants. Not a surprise, but a lot of urban development does not have those healthy soils or these soil mitigation practices. And we found terrific effects of healthy of the compost. Okay, now this is where things kind of get strange for us because the developer really liked these plantings, this planting. And before we even got any of these results, it was the first growing season. They said, we like this so much, we want to put them in 11 model homes. And, Patrick Boland, my colleague from University of Central Florida, and I were talking to the developer, and we're like, you might want to wait until we see whether or not how these things do over a first growing season. But they liked it and they wanted to move ahead. So we helped them. We wanted to make sure this didn't fail. And here are two model homes in their new development that are using no turf whatsoever, and all mostly native, at least 75% native plants. And that was really hindered by plant availability, which I'll mention later on. Okay. Now, the exciting part about this was, sorry, let me get a drink. If you recall, when I showed you base camp, I showed you a development across the street. Here's Westland Park. This is where the model homes were with these native dominated plants. Across the street is a Del Webb retirement community being built at the same time. And it's actually owned by the same developer. So this gave us an opportunity for my master student, Victoria Cope and Michaela Hegman from University of Central Florida, to look at what happens when you go from this sort of scorched earth, lousy soil conditions to a conventional turf grass dominated with a few ornamental plants to this very different, unconventional, native dominated turf-free landscape. What happens to the arthropod community? Because people are very interested in pollinators, but we also wanted to look at arthropods because we see them as a resource for other wildlife. So it gave us a really unique opportunity to look at that. And give you a couple of quick slides as to what we found. Just initially, I'm not going to get into all the results, but when we looked at these two different landscapes, the students looked at how many flowers there were in each landscape. And surprisingly, there were no difference in the number of flowers between these two communities, the conventional versus the native plant dominated landscapes. But what we found was throughout both growing seasons that they sampled, native dominated communities had much higher pollinator abundance. So just having a lot of flowers wasn't as important as having the correct flowers, which is a really important sort of lesson to learn. Now let's talk about water irrigation, the irrigation savings. That's why the developer kind of went after this project in the first place. They wanted to conserve water. The additional benefits to pollinators and arthropods is really, the native plant industry and growers was very secondary to them. This was, something that what they wanted to do is save water. So just as a basis, Toho, the water management authority there, has a goal for their homes where they say that most landscapes can be maintained with 28 inches of water per year. And if you meet that standard, you're meeting their standard and you get a pat on the back. You did a good job. And this is about 63 gallons of water a year, 63,000 gallons of water per year. And just for reference, the landscapes that we're working on, the landscaped area is tiny, about 3,600 square feet. So just let's keep that in perspective. So what did these landscapes, the native landscapes, use relative to the conventional landscapes? Del Webb, our conventional landscape, was using about 123,000 gallons per year. So twice as much as what Toho Water Authority wants them to use. Westland Park, the native plant dominated ones. Now we had model homes that were managed by our partner Cherry Lake, the plant grower, and other people. Okay, I don't want to mention who the other people are, and you'll see why. Cherry Lake in their landscapes were using 35,000 gallons of water per year. We still think we can get that number down more, but working with private, but that's me having my research hat on, right? I can get that number because I know those native plants and I know they can thrive with less plant or less water. But Cherry Lake is also trying to maintain an attractive landscape that somebody will come into and buy. So you know, we work, that's kind of this sort of like back and forth between private industry and research that is quite valuable because I'm learning what's important to private industry. They're learning about the biology of these plants. Now, but let's look at this. The other native plant dominated plant or lots, on average, we're using 152,000 gallons of water, even more than the conventional landscape. So, whoa, that's like, what the heck's going on here? Well, what this means is we can give somebody a tool, such as drought tolerant native plants, but unless you actually educate someone on how to use that tool, they're not going to know what to do. Like you give someone a hammer, they're not going to know they've never seen a hammer before. They don't know what this is for, right? They might use it to scrape paint off a wall or something. I don't know, but unless you educate them about how to use this and the resource demands of this landscape versus this landscape, so we have our work cut out for us, more educational opportunities. Okay, moving forward though, I'm getting into like what the next steps for this project are, and they're pretty exciting. In the next 300 homes that are being built, they are installing very similar landscapes to what were in the model homes, but they're making some additions. They're going to add compost amendments to increase the soil water holding capacity and to improve the plant health and to have, you know, because also more flowers equals a more attractive plant, right? So that's good. Toho, in the code for the development, the HOA codes, they're going to have that the landscapes are required to use 24 inches or less per year. This is a new Toho Water Authority requirement. Water is going to be master managed by a private company. And what that means is these homes all have dual meters. So you can see how much water is being used outside, how much is being used inside. And that private company will then, if they see a home is using too much water, will go to the homeowner and talk to them in an educational capacity about ways to manage your water better and manage your landscape better. And then they have this policy now where landscape companies, if a homeowner hires a landscape company who doesn't meet this water requirement, they're going to be removed from the preferred list. So they're trying to promote this through private industry practices, through just better behavior. And they're going to use at least 75% native plants. But again, I emphasize when available. Okay, why am I saying when available? Probably everybody on this call who works in urban landscapes knows that there's a bottleneck with native plant supplies, right? There's a lot of demand and increasing demand from homeowners, the public, a lot of people interested in it, but we're not producing enough. And that really provides a real important market opportunity, I think, a business opportunity. Okay. I'm going to give you a couple dream projections here. Okay, here's some of the model homes. You can see the native dominated landscapes. Surprisingly, homes are still selling, right? There was concern initially whether homeowners would-be home buyers would come to these and want to buy the homes, and they're still selling the homes. And I'm told, at least anecdotally by realtors, 33% of the people show up and they go, what the heck is this? Another 33% show up and go, wow, this is really cool because they get what they're trying to do. And another 33 are indifferent. So there's a lot of variation in home buyers is what we're learning, which is very exciting. But let's look at these landscapes. Once they're established, the idea of this was we were trying to use plants that would never really need water or fertilizer or herbicides or anything again once they are established. Of course, you have to irrigate them to establishment. Now, these landscape areas are about 0.03 hectares. Sorry, I should have that in acres. And if we followed UF fertilizer and irrigation recommendation for various turf varieties, Using this landscape, we can prevent 3.2 to 8.3 thousand pounds of nitrogen per year from getting into the environment just in these next 300 yards, okay? And we can also prevent 500 or 40 pounds of phosphorus from getting into the environment annually. Now, this is in the form of mineral fertilizer. Of course, the compost has nitrogen in it as total nitrogen, and that's another discussion. And regarding water savings, this is 36 to 130,000 gallons per day can be saved. That's a lot of water, especially in Florida where we're running out of water resources. Lastly, we can prevent 85,000 pounds of CO2 from entering the atmosphere annually. And that's due to how we manage our landscapes through lawn mowing, leaf blowers, but not just that. It's actually the energy that we use to pump irrigation onto our landscapes and the energy used in the production of fertilizer and movement of stuff. Okay, now this collaboration has provided great outreach opportunities. One of them is the Outside CoLab. This is it's a consortium or a cohort of private industry partners from urban planners, landscaping architect firms, home builders, land developers, green industry professionals who have all joined together, and including academic and extension partners, working together to figure out how we can design and manage urban landscapes to be less resource impactful. And we've hosted 2 events now. About 200 people have shown up to look at these landscapes and our projects and have discussions about how to make things better. For example, here's Ernie Cox. He's a developer talking to Cherry Lake's president, Tim Sallin. And these collaborations here, this sort of outreach opportunity, these sort of events that we host that educate people about these have created new opportunities. These sorts of landscapes, these sorts of approaches that you're seeing here are now being adopted in 40,000 new homes and 2 new development projects that encompass 77,000 acres. So that's a big deal. So there's an opportunity for new change. And I also wanted to point out that the Outside CoLab has resources for people to utilize, such as a new pattern book of how to design a native plant-dominated less resource intensive landscape that have been being used now in different developments here. There's 2 different pattern books. So they give you ideas for landscaping designs. This was developed by Dix Height. This one here was developed by Dix Height and Gail Hansen, Dr. Gail Hansen from University of Florida, and they're freely available to all to use. And Cherry Lake's doing something really interesting here. They're trying to educate other people. Like, first off, the problem is like who's going to know how to manage this alternative style of landscape, right? Well, what they're trying to do is develop a set of videos, both in English and Spanish, that will talk about how to manage these different types of landscapes, and they're freely available for all people to use, and they're a starting point for conversation. And you also have different Sunbridge Garden series, and then there's the videos from the Outside CoLab talks if you weren't able to attend the events. And then I'm going to wrap this talk up here. So in conclusion, all right, what we've learned is that we were approached by a developer who needed to conserve water, and we thought of like, okay, well, this might be an opportunity to start to enhance ecological value of these residential developments that are happening anyway. So what it shows us is conservation goals do not need to be mutually exclusive. We can think of ways to overlap them and make them work together. Obviously, for me, I see the land development that's happening in Florida as an opportunity for long-term research to study how ecological communities reassemble after we destroy a natural environment to build homes. I think it's really important to do that because the development is happening anyway, and there's nothing I can do about it, nothing a lot of people can do about it. Water conservation efforts are offering economic opportunities. I think that's a valuable thing. Oftentimes when we think of conservation, we often think, oh, this is going to hurt business. Well, if you think about it correctly and you put a spin on it, if you were a green industry professional who knew how to manage and start a landscape well, now there's opportunities, or how to conserve water well, there's opportunities for you. And ultimately, I don't think we're going to really solve complex real world environmental challenges without bringing in everyone to the table. And that's what I love about this project. We brought in private industry. We're working with, as my academic hat's still on, I'm working with NGOs, and we're bringing municipal partners. and we are making better environmental decisions. They're slow. Are they the best decisions? Not fully there yet. Are some of these landscapes looking a little strange still? Yes, they are, but we're moving in the right direction, and it's giving us an opportunity to collaborate to make adaptive decision making. And I think that's where I'm going to end my talk. Thank you for your time and for listening to me patiently.
So if you got time for Q&A,
Oh, I got however many how much time you need. Let me just expand my window.
Yeah, I guess yeah, there's some stuff in the chat here. And I guess for anybody, yeah, well, if anybody needs to go, we got you covered for CEUs at this point, but I think we're gonna go a little bit over on this one.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was told I had 45 to 50 minutes and I consumed my time. So sorry.
No,
but I'm
no
happy
worries.
to stick around for questions. And also, like I said, I'm willing to share the slide presentation, and anyone can email me or call me anytime to have a conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, no, and we really appreciate it when you can stick around. And there's some people that like, it's not a big deal for them to stick around too. I just wanted to throw that out there for the folks that like needed to head out.
Yeah.
So let me go all the way to the top here. There's some questions.
Oh yeah, I can't see the chat in my window right now. So
okay. Okay, here's one from, and I know this might be going all the way back to like mid through your PowerPoint. So so where they're referencing here. So the visual qualities on an average across are the visual qualities on average across the species. And I guess this is maybe your rating. And what is the interaction of the species with the compost?
Yeah, very good question. Very good question. Yes, first to answer your first question, yes, that what I showed you visual quality was averaged across all the species in the plot. Okay. Now, your second question, were there interactions with the compost and the individual species? We have not done those analyses yet, but we are definitely need to do that. And I will say that we did see some species that did better under all conditions and some species that did poorly under all conditions as well, like lobelia, cardinal flower. I didn't think so, but some of our partners in the landscape design thought they might actually do okay because that water or that soil had a lot of clay in it and might hold water. And maybe in more irrigated plot it might survive, but it didn't. And I'm just giving that as an example. The shrubs across the entire experiment, they were a little rough. They were having a struggling time to establish. They were a little slow to establish, more than we expected. But we are certainly exploring. We're going to basically do those analyses for individual species next. Sorry to leave you with a cliffhanger, but that's where we're at with that. So
yeah, got to have room for the next round of research here. So
well, it's all part of the same PhD project, but these things go slow.
So, okay, next question is what was the compost used and what was the application rate of that compost?
Excellent question, and I can answer I can give you the exact amount if you give me 1 second here. The compost was provided by Life Soils, a company, and we have a bag of it sitting so we can look at and the application rate. I actually have it on my slide because I apologize. It's something I never quite remember. It was a lot. It was 4 cubic yards per 1,000 square feet. So it was not a non-trivial amount. And I know that there's been other studies that have utilized the compost at smaller amounts that have still had success. Now, the one thing I will say is we're Florida. We have very sandy soils relative to other parts of the country. And if you think about how sandy your soils are in that development site, this amount of compost, if we applied it to Minnesota, where there's like massive amounts of organic matter in soil, it probably wouldn't have done anything. But because of Florida soil conditions, which are very sandy, tend to have lower organic matter, even a smaller amount of organic compost added into the soil can improve plant growing conditions. So, but this was a lot, not a non-trivial amount, I will say that. So, yeah.
Okay, building on all this, the compost questions here. So So what you're saying, and it starts out a little like not so much as a question, but it kind of turns into it. So what you are saying or showing in these sample plots completed is that soil improvements, mixing in compost is important and useful as a specification to be required, not just adequate irrigation and watering for new installations. I think these applies for both native and exotic, non-native, and plants, and yeah, all types of plants, basically.
Yeah, that's a good statement, and it goes back to, we've, not me, but I've had colleagues who looked at compost amendments just in pre-application of compost amendments in more conventional landscapes, lawn-dominated landscapes, and they're able to reduce water usage by 33% because it increases soil holding capacity and the growing condition for turf grass. And you're absolutely right. It wouldn't, I don't see any reason. I mean, we didn't use any non-native plants in this because we were testing for production opportunities for new native species in the industry. But there is no reason why the benefits that we see with the native plants wouldn't transfer over to non-native, right? I mean, it's not like native and non-native plants are different. They both have physiological responses to healthy soils, right? So your point's well taken, and I agree with that. And regarding the requirement, I think you're right. I mean, we are seeing healthier plants with 80% less water. This to me points to the need to really start to think about that soil health in the early development phases as a way to conserve water and have attractive looking landscapes. So yeah, no, that's definitely.
Okay, so here's another one. How is the preferred list for contractors maintained and updated? And then there's additional parts to it. How is it marketed and promoted to property owners and developers? And is there any liability or concerns for having this list maintained?
Okay, I'm gonna put on my be honestly, these are all decisions that I'm not involved with at all. These are all decisions made with the HOA board and the Sunbridge Stewardship District. So I can't speak to them with great precision, to be frankly honest. I just know that they said there's gonna come up with a preferred list of contractors. I don't know how that's gonna be developed yet. I do know with that slide that where they are going to add the compost, they're going to have a master managed plant, a water company who manages and looks at water usage and goes speaks to the homeowners, and they're going to require that the landscaping companies use those or they'll be removed from a preferred list. I don't know how they're establishing that preferred list though. And I don't know how the marketing is being done to the homeowner, whether or not that's through the HOA document or when they buy the home. I'm not exactly sure on that, but that's a good question. I'll look into that. Sorry, I don't have an answer. And I also will to say, like, and when we get through the chat, if you want to turn off your mics and speak up and share your wonderful faces, that would be good too. I'm happy with that. But however John wants to run it.
Yeah, no, yeah, so I usually try and announce that, but I mean, there were a lot of questions pouring into the chat, and so like I was
And
like,
I'm sorry, when I was giving the talk, I don't see the chat or else, so I wasn't trying to be rude by ignoring your question.
yeah, if any of you want to go ahead and speak up, if we don't get to it in the chat here, and there's still a lot that we're working through the list on right now, but yeah, you know, feel free to that's what this is all about right now, is like so that you guys can have access to the presenters. And so I feel very gracious or thankful that you guys can make your time to do this. So next question is what
This is one of the fun parts, so thanks for having me.
so why are there not many small trees used in the additions?
Do you mean in the plots or in the model homes?
I don't know, Donna, if you're still here, like
In the
you can
model homes.
Oh yeah, good question. I think there were, but there were in along the street right of ways, along the streets and stuff, but the model homes, they were so compacted and close to each other that maybe the pictures didn't capture where they were used along the medians in the development. And but the landscaped area is quite small. And I think that's part of the problem is putting big trees end up getting
Well,
close to homes and things like that. But These, and probably the pictures don't capture it, but there are trees being used throughout the neighborhood. For
Pictures I saw on your plant palette that you did have Simpson stopper in the Ilex vomitoria. In
Oh, okay, that
Weeping.
plant list. So thank you for clarifying. That plant list was for the experimental plots, okay?
Mhm.
And the reason that plant list was used for the experimental plots is because we wanted, our partners and I, we wanted to explore, not trees. We wanted to explore some more herbaceous species, and we
Mhm.
leaned on some shrubs to kind of enhance the aesthetic value of that experiment. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
I think
So
it would have looked good with those wildflowers, though. I don't think it would have hurt the plantings at
yeah,
all. It made
no,
it
no, I
look
agree with
nicer.
you. Agree with you wholeheartedly. But then it also would have thrown in another component into the experiment: light
Oh,
availability. Right.
okay.
So yeah, but the main reason is because our partners Cherry Lake and some of the other plant producers, we were trying to look for plants, if you could imagine, like there's not a lot of big trees in these neighborhoods, right? So these plants are establishing in really super light intensive environments.
Yeah.
So we wanted to explore that route and provide plants that could meet that need. Um, but I agree, if we had that's something we can do in the future now that we're done with the experiments, add trees to the
I
gardens.
think it's really beautiful and exciting, and I'm so happy that you're doing it.
No, thank you. Thank you.
So there's a question here. I want to learn more about handling requests from the county and residents for arthropod control. What can I do to avoid impacting the environment? That's kind of broad.
Can you say that again?
I want to learn about handling requests from the county and residents for arthropod control. What can I do to avoid impacting the environment? And I can see that December here. She's popped up. You need to go ahead and unmute yourself though.
Yeah.
Hi, I really enjoyed your presentation, Dr. Iannone. I will say that I heard everything and I loved all of it. But one of the questions that's been on my mind recently, because I'm in conversation with my county about treating our acreage of parks for mosquitoes. And they want to do multiple ways. And in the past, I've requested help for prevention of mosquitoes, but now I don't want to just do it anymore. I really want to think about it and know what we're supposed to do. What's the right thing to do? Should we just put up with mosquitoes, or should we? I mean, they want to do aerial larvicide, and they're doing aerial larvicide next week in response to the flooding that we've had. And then I sat and met with the guy from the county. He was very informative, and he did share with me that a lot of the county parks are declining to use the treatments on their natural areas. So you have any thoughts to share on that? That would be really great.
So I'm not an expert on uh, pesticides and treating mosquitoes. I will say that, but you bring up a really important contradiction, right? Like, so we do know that these pesticides that are being used aren't just necessarily impacting mosquitoes, right? They have non-target impacts on other organisms that are not harmful to humans. But we are living in a human-dominated environment where we do need to worry about disease transmitted by mosquitoes, and especially with the flooding that you're having. That's, I mean, a real concern. And especially through some of the breeding cycles of the mosquitoes, if you had they can be more drought tolerant, they can come out more abundantly, and it's kind of, they're amazing creatures as much as we hate them, right? Uh, but I don't. I would put you in touch. Send me an email, and I'm going to put you in touch with some other people who could help you a lot better than I can. But I do think the key point that you're bringing up here is, okay, how do we come up with an environment that supports arthropods, but at the same time address the real issue of, humans are living here. We have to worry about, not all arthropods are going to be good in human environments, right? And there's a complexity there, because a lot of what we know for pesticides have non-target impacts. I think sometimes under certain conditions, especially after floods or something, you have to do what you have to do to protect people. But then moving forward, like in our environments, I'll tell you an anecdotal thing what we're seeing right now. My student saw a lot of arthropod pest that would be considered pest in those native dominated communities, thrips, for example. We had an emergence of thrips in those native dominated plant communities. But what was really intriguing about it was our partners who maintained the landscape said they saw no plant damage or no abundant plant damage. So it suggests that something's happening there where there's what would normally be a pest is not really having the impact. So I do think we can manage landscapes where we can have like natural pest control through increased predators, right? And I've seen that with some of my research. More dense plantings, more biodiverse plantings attract different types of more predator arthropods and decreases the abundance of pest in your landscape. So that certain design elements, certain plant choices. But with mosquitoes, that's a different story because you're talking about something that's a disease vector, and we have to have it's a lot more impactful than just something that's going to kill your plant. So yeah, send me an email. I'll put you in touch with some people. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you're, reach out to county extension too. Like that's what we're here
Yes.
for. We are supposed to be on the local level, like plugging you in with like the experts. And so if you,
And is that your name, Lauren, or is your first name December? Oh,
My name's December Lauritano.
great name, great name. I only saw, I didn't see the end of your name on the, but yeah, I think John would be reach out to him, and I think, the local extension can help you probably more than even the specialist I can help you with. But loop me both in the email. We can keep in the conversation.
I'll do it. Thank you so much.
okay, I can see John Harris, like, he's got multiple questions and he's got his hands raised too. So I'm gonna pass it off to John here.
All I'm saying is thanks for the overtime and getting us answers, and being one of the people that goes back 40 plus years in landscaping, not just in Florida, having this current research project that proves again that all soil is not soil, and just using fill or even requiring sterile landscape soil or sterile soil for landscape fill doesn't provide all of the organics and or what I generally call a live soil environment. So this research project, as huge as it is really reconfirming, what farmers have known for hundreds of years is if you are trying to grow plants and grow them healthy, you need to grow healthy soil first to grow healthy plants. So do you guys have any examples of how this research would end up actually being part of required specifications by any agencies for projects in their areas, as opposed to just like Cherry Lake recommending heavily that landscape plans include, compost?
Oh, yeah. No, so it's not just Cherry Lake. That benefit is the builders who are buying the lots and building the homes and installing the landscapes are being required to put in fill in that compost. I'm sorry, not fill. They all have the fill. They're being required to put in the compost. So that is a requirement of the builder in this scenario now. So that's, I've always said, like, I don't think, government and rules and regulations are the best way to change behavior. I'd like to see people do that on a free will, but not ever, like, the reality is people don't make the right decisions, right? The best decisions. So I think they are doing that as an example, and we are starting to see it being adopted in other developments. Now, as to whether or not the next step, getting this into county and city codes for new development, that would be something that we could really use help with, because I think that would be very impactful. And I will go a step further, John. I live in a home that's from 1957. And when development was being done in the 50s, you're talking about a few hundred homes being built here and there at best. And it wasn't at the same magnitude as a 37,000 home developer by one developer. So the whole style of development has changed drastically, where they found some areas where they could build a few homes and they tried to do something with the soil, and they had, enough time to maybe put topsoil back. These developments happen so quick and there's such a large scale that they're going with this new fill. And it's one of the biggest problems with water conservation. So yeah, no, I just think it's pretty comical as well in a way that, you know, we're just starting to realize like the soil matters in our urban landscapes, right? And I
Or-
wonder what will happen in the future with these landscapes, the newer developments where they're using this sterile fill compared to those older landscapes. And it's probably gonna slow down the progress of soil development in that biological below ground community that you need to sustain a healthy plant community. So, yeah.
Well, as a landscape economist, let me just tell you that the day that we can have developers show that they sold a house where the landscape grew because of the, you know, fractional additional cost of compost for, you know, and I'm making this up, but 5% more, so that the investment actually pays them back or pays everybody back, is the day that everybody does it. And then secondly, with your point about the ordinances and the codes, some of us actually assist cities and counties in writing codes. So so we are coming up with that. And the Florida Urban Forestry Council just got a US Forest Service grant to be working on and developing a new model municipal ordinance statewide. And so we're gonna have focal groups and reviews on that. So landscape standards such as this can be part of what we're going to include as kind of a pick list of, you know, compare your ordinance to the model ordinance sections. So I'll be coming back to you, Basil. And,
All right,
and
great. Thanks, John.
All right.
Excited. That's exciting. And just, I want to add something there for the group so they know this. What John brought up is really critical. The economics. If you tell a developer that it's going to cost them $1,000 more to put in a different type of landscape, they're not going to do it. And you think about it from our perspective, if you're buying a home and you got a 30-year mortgage or 20-year, $1,000 isn't really anything, right? But over all these homes, they're really trying to nickel and dime their way to, just like anybody else who's in business, right? Any cost seems, you know, like something they don't want to take on. So John's right. If we can convince them that that $1,000 extra increases sales or does something, or doesn't hinder their ability to sell or improves it, then that is an important thing to do. And when I think about it personally, not being a home builder, I think to myself, big deal. What's an extra $1,000, right? Or what's an extra? But to the builder, it's a risk they're not willing to take. So yeah.
you go back to the 70s and 80s, I guess, early 90s, when there used to be, you know, and with your home in this development, we'll give you a composting kit so that you can continue to compost and you know, use it for your soil. You know, here we are back again with that. And my wife's reminded me to bring up, we have always been composting today and adding it to our, you know, our landscape, you know, as opposed to actually putting in chemical-based fertilizer. So, you know, there's that continuing, you know, compost, you know, for the homeowner. So thanks again.
Sure. Thanks, John.
Okay, we're on our last couple questions here. I'm gonna go ahead and launch the quiz too for anybody else that's still around. So we can multitask a little bit and try and wrap up. So that should be launched. So the question here is erosion post install. What about requiring developers to install leaders and gutters to control rainwater runoff?
Yeah. So, okay. This is great. Thank you for bringing that up. Because here's why. They had I wasn't able to attend this event, but they had a focus group meeting of the residents who are moving into these model homes with these native dominated landscapes. And I was cringing because I wasn't able to go and help them with it. And all I thought it was going to happen was all the homeowners were going to go in and say, we hate our landscapes. Why do we live in this weird landscape, right? And we wanted to, and it turns out that wasn't what happened. What turned out was these homes are using pine straw for mulch, okay? Now, we had I think there could be better compost or mulch strategies. There's ground cover strategies, but again, this is a work in progress, right? We have adapted decision making in the future. But what turns out what the homeowners complained about was, number one, pine straw compost was very expensive. So they were all okay with their landscapes, right? Number two, there was erosion happening. And the reason the erosion was happening in part was because these contractors, the builders, were not required to install the rain gutters and the proper storm drainage. So I don't know what's going to happen in the future with that. I don't know that this developer or the builders will care enough to actually do anything about that. But I do think that is also an important component when we're talking about soil conservation on site and soil erosion. Proper rain gutters and proper placement of the release of those rain gutters into an established lawn or established vegetation area, or even, there's been also talk of, and I like this idea, is we always look at stormwater ponds as like the go-to best management practice for managing all of our runoff off our urban landscapes. What if we build incrementally smaller things throughout, like rain gardens in people's yards, swale and gutters, and so we can manage that rain that comes off of our hardscapes a little bit better. So, but no, great question. And it was leading to soil erosion in some of these model homes. And that was the concern of the homeowners more so than the plants looking weird or ugly, which we thought might have been the concern. So thanks for bringing that up.
All right, last question. What reasoning did landscapers give that use substantially more water in native yards than Cherry Lake?
Whew. There's, I don't have all the reasons. Okay, I don't have all the reasons, but I can tell you by working with our partner, Jimmy Rogers in Cherry Lake, who's been awesome. He's an awesome partner, and they really want to try to do things right and succeed. But I'm a plant ecologist, right? When I see a wilting plant in an environment, I go, big deal. It's a native plant. It's a physiological stress. And once the sun goes down, that plant will look fine. We'll get rain tomorrow. It'll be okay. But a lot of people see that and go, oh my gosh, that plant's under duress. We have to irrigate it. That's one of them. It's like unrealistic expectations of what you see from the plant material in your yard. It always has to be green all the time. And at least in Florida, we all know we have the wet season, we have the dry season, right? And plants look brown and crunchy in the dry season, crunchier than they do in the wet season. So some little level of unrealistic expectation, I think, is a certain degree of the plants always have to look healthiest as possible. Another one I think is some of the landscape management companies who are managing those yards just didn't know. They just set the irrigation timers on as if they would for a standard conventional landscape. And we haven't been able to get in connection with them and get them to change their behaviors. It's just, again, they just don't know that these plants don't need that water. And even in our experiment, we had debates about, look, they don't need that much water. During these drought periods, just turn on a little bit of water. It'll go a long way. There's going to be diminishing returns because of the native plant and its high level of drought tolerance. Irrigate it once for 20 minutes, and then we bet you it'll be good enough for it to go a long time. And there's debates, and we kind of gave up on those debates because we're working with private industry, and we needed to make this look like a landscape plant. But the next stage of our experiment is we really do want to push it to see how far we can go without water, right? So. But yeah, so I think it's just not knowing how to manage this landscape, and because it's different, and maybe some unrealistic expectations as to what your landscape can look like under really dry conditions. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for making time for us. And I know that we're a little more geared towards South Florida. I'd be really curious to see what some of these would look like and some of the results, if you could collaborate down here and bring it down here someday. But
I would love that. I would love that, John. Let me know. And everybody, please, I just want to thank everyone for attending, and also thank you for the interesting questions. I appreciate that a lot.
we'll keep up the awesome work. And I mean, it seems like I think that based off of the demand for this, there's just, for this particular webinar, there's just a lot of questions that people have, and you're doing work that's really valuable right now. And I know that there's a lot out there with Talamy and some of these, folks and it's starting to catch some wind for sure. So
yeah, and I think that the difference here is in Florida, we have land development, and it's happening whether we want it to or not. I'm going to say it. I'd be happy if land development stopped in Florida. You know, I'd be more than happy. There'd be other ecological problems I could go study and try to solve. But the reality is it's happening. And if we weren't sitting at the table with this developer, they would just be trying to do the old tried and true approaches, which we know are failing for water conservation. And so, you know, what can you do? That's what we have to work with them to that extent. So, yeah, good.
Well, awesome. Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing more. So,
All right. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate your time. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
take care, folks.
Bye.